For 3 years my son didn't call. Not one call. Not a card at Christmas. Not a word when Helen died. I'm 82 years old. My name is Walter. What I'm going to tell you today is the hardest thing I've shared from this chair. 7 lessons that slowly put me back together. After the silence from my own son nearly finished what the grief had started. The first lesson was this. The silence is not the whole story. When David stopped speaking to me, in the spring of 2018, about 6 months after Helen died, I spent a very long time believing the silence was a verdict. A final judgment on who I had been as a father. On the years I'd worked too much, on the things I'd said and hadn't said, on the version of David's childhood that I'd given him rather than the one he deserved. I believed the silence was proof, and the belief sat in me the way a bad joint sits in a wall. Invisible from the outside, but slowly, over time, causing the whole structure to shift. I'd wake up in the night and run the inventory. The baseball game in 1981 I'd missed. The graduation in 1989 I'd missed. The Christmas Eve in 1983. The years I'd been in the shop when I should have been in the house. The ways I'd been there in body and somewhere else entirely in mind. All of it came up in the night, and the silence from David seemed to confirm every item on the list. I was guilty. The silence was the sentence. For about 18 months I lived in that story, and the story nearly broke me, because if the silence was the whole truth, if what I'd been to my son was so insufficient that he couldn't bring himself to speak to me in the year his mother died, then what was left? What was there to be? What changed the story was a conversation with Susan. Susan had stayed in contact with David through those 3 years. Carefully, quietly, not making herself a messenger between us but staying in his life. And one Thursday evening, about 20 months in, she said something that I've thought about almost every week since. She said, "Pop, David isn't silent because he's decided who you are. He's silent because he doesn't know how to be with what he's feeling. There's a difference. He doesn't know how to be with what he's feeling." I sat with that for a long time, because it meant the silence wasn't a verdict. It was a symptom, not of my failure, or not only of my failure, of his, of the particular way grief and old pain and the complicated inheritance of a father-son relationship can produce a paralysis that looks like rejection from the outside, but is actually something else from the inside. I still don't know everything that was happening in David during those 3 years. We've talked since, I'll tell you about that, but there are things he hasn't said and I've stopped needing him to say. What I know is that the silence was not simple. It was not what I thought it was in the 18 months I thought I knew what it was. The first lesson is this: the silence of someone who loves you is almost never what you think it is. It usually contains more than one thing. It contains pain you caused them and pain they brought themselves, and fear and exhaustion, and things that have nothing to do with you at all. When you decide you know exactly what the silence means, you're usually wrong, and the deciding closes the door to the truth of it. I was wrong about what the silence meant. Learning that I was wrong was the beginning of the healing. The second lesson was that grief breaks things that were already cracked. I want to say this carefully, because it's easy to misuse. I'm not saying that Helen's death excuses what David did, or excuses what I'd done in the years before it. I'm saying something more specific. When Helen died in October of 2017, she was the person who had been holding us together. Not consciously, not as a project, but naturally in the way that people who are good at relationships hold other people's relationships together simply by being present and attentive and warm. Helen knew how to be with David in a way I didn't. She'd call him on Tuesdays without a reason. She'd remember things he'd mentioned and follow up on them a month later. She understood his interior in a way that I'd never quite managed. She was the translator between us in a sense, the person who could take what David was feeling and help me understand it, and take what I was trying to say and help him hear it. When she died, that translation went with her. What was left was David and me, without the buffer, without the woman who'd been quietly maintaining the connection for 35 years. Just the two of us and the unfinished business and the grief and the particular weight of being the son and the father in a relationship that had never been entirely healed. The crack had been there for years. The grief didn't create it, but the grief widened it. The grief applied pressure to the place that was already weak. The way Maine winters apply pressure to the places in a foundation that were never quite right. The crack that you could have lived with indefinitely, if everything else stayed the same. The crack that could have been caulked and managed and never quite dealt with directly. That crack opened. The second lesson is this: grief exposes what was hidden. The rupture between David and me didn't come out of nowhere. It came out of years of an imperfect relationship between a man who didn't know how to be present and a son who had learned not to expect him to be. Helen's death didn't cause the rupture. It removed the thing that had been preventing it. If I'd understood that earlier, if I'd understood that the silence was partly the delayed arrival of something that had been building for decades, I might have been less surprised by it, and less self-destructive in response to it. I want to be more specific about what I mean by the crack, because saying the relationship was imperfect is too vague, to be honest. David grew up with a father who was physically present and emotionally absent. Not always. Not completely. But enough. I'd come home from the shop and I'd eat supper and I'd read the paper and I'd go to bed. I'd nod when nodding was called for and answer when answering was called for. But the asking "what are you thinking?" the sitting on the floor with him when he was small, the genuine curiosity about his interior that a boy needs from his father. I gave less of that than I should have. David knew it. He didn't say it when he was young. Children adapt. They adjust their expectations to the father they have rather than the one they needed. But the adjustment costs something. The adjustment is a form of giving up on something. And what David gave up on sometime in his teenage years was the hope that I'd become the father who was fully present. He stopped expecting it. He stopped wanting it, at least on the surface. He became self-sufficient in the way that children of distant fathers become self-sufficient, and we went on like that for 30 years, the two of us, in a relationship that worked, mostly, that had warmth in it genuinely, that had the shared history and the Sunday calls and the visits and the real moments of connection, but that was also underneath a relationship that had never fully healed from the early distance. Helen's death removed her, the buffer, the translator, the woman who'd been quietly maintaining what neither of us had managed to fully build. And what was left was the two of us and the 30-year-old wound that neither of us had ever quite named. That wound didn't close on its own. It needed air. It needed to be seen. And the seeing, when it finally came, was painful enough to produce 3 years of silence before either of us could figure out how to begin the conversation. When I say the silence wasn't a verdict, I don't mean I was innocent. When I say David's silence was partly about his own pain, I don't mean it wasn't also about mine. Both of those things are true, simultaneously, and holding them simultaneously, without collapsing one into the other, without saying it was all my fault or it was all his. That was one of the most difficult things the 3 years asked of me. I am a man who worked too much. That is true. I am also a man who showed up for his son in every way he knew how to show up. That is also true. I caused David pain by being absent in the ways I was absent. That is true. David caused me pain by going silent in the way he went silent. That is also true. These are not contradictory statements. They are simultaneous truths about a complicated relationship between two people who loved each other and had never quite figured out how to do that clearly. The particular trap I fell into in those first 18 months was trying to resolve the simultaneity, to make one thing the truth and the other thing the excuse. I'd swing between them. It's all my fault, and then, but he shouldn't have gone silent, and then, but look at what I put him through, and then, but his mother just died, and I was alone and he left me alone. Back and forth, round and round, never resting in both at once. What finally helped was a question I started asking myself in the evenings, by the fire after the inventory had run through again. Instead of, whose fault is this, I started asking, what is true? And what was true was both things. The fault and the pain were shared. Not equally, there are no equal scales for this kind of thing. But shared, between a father who hadn't known how to be fully present and a son who had learned to protect himself from that absence in a way that eventually looked like abandonment. We were both doing what we'd learned to do. The lesson is not that either of us was wrong. The lesson is that the doing of what we'd learned had brought us here. And the here required something different from both of us. The fourth lesson was that I could not wait for his call. This is the lesson that cost me the most to learn, and the one I most resisted. For the first 2 years of the silence, I believed, really believed, in a way I'm now somewhat ashamed of, that the right thing was to wait, that the reaching out was his responsibility, not mine, that I'd done enough, tried enough, given enough, and now the next move was his, that if I called or wrote or showed up at his door, I'd be, what? Begging, conceding, making it more awkward than it already was. I was the father. He was the son. The son was the one who'd gone silent. Therefore, the son was the one who needed to break the silence. That was the logic. Helen would have rejected that logic immediately. She'd have said, "Walter, it doesn't matter whose move it is. It matters whether the door stays open or closes. And the door only stays open if someone holds it open." But Helen wasn't there to say it. So the logic stood, and the silence continued. What changed it was something small. A memory, not a conversation. I was in the shop in the 2nd February of the silence, working on a cutting board. Something to do with my hands, not a commissioned piece, just the work. And I remembered something I hadn't thought about in 30 years. When David was 8 years old, there was a period of about 3 weeks when we were in a kind of Cold War. Something had happened between us. I don't remember the specifics. Some disagreement that had escalated and then calcified into mutual stubbornness. We weren't speaking much. We were being polite at the table and cold in between. It went on for 3 weeks, because I was waiting for him to apologize. He was 8 years old and I was 41, and I was waiting for an 8-year-old to come to me. Helen ended it. She came into the shop one evening, and she stood in the doorway and she said, "Walter, he's 8. And something about the way she said it, the flatness of it, the obvious accuracy of it, broke through. I went inside and I found David in his room and I said, "I think we've been at this long enough." And he said, "Yeah," and that was the end of it. He's 8. I was standing at the workbench in the 2nd February of the silence, and I heard Helen's voice saying that, and I thought, he's not 8, he's 55, but some of the principle is the same. Someone has to go first, and waiting for the other person to go first is just 2 people standing in the cold, neither of them willing to open the door. I wrote him a letter, not a long one, not a confrontational one, not an attempt to resolve anything or assign blame or make a case. 3 paragraphs. I said I missed him. I said I understood that something between us had broken, and I wasn't sure exactly what or how. I said the door on my side was open whenever he was ready. And I said I loved him. I sent it. He didn't respond for 6 weeks, and then he called. I want to tell you about those 6 weeks, because I almost called back. I almost wrote a second letter. I almost drove to Portland. The waiting was its own kind of torture. I'd sent the letter, and now the letter was out there, and I had no control over what happened to it. Maybe he'd read it and decided it was too little too late. Maybe he'd read it and needed time, and the time was going to be longer than 6 weeks. Maybe he'd never respond at all, and I'd have to spend the rest of my life knowing I'd tried and gotten nothing back. I talked to myself a lot in those 6 weeks, not out loud mostly, but internally, the way you hold a conversation with yourself when there's nobody else to have it with. And the conversation was mostly me trying to convince myself that the sending of the letter was enough, that I'd done what I could, that his not responding was his choice now, not mine. Some days I believed it, some days I didn't. The hardest day was a Tuesday in the 4th week, when I drove past the post office and thought about stopping and sending another letter. Just a note. I sent a letter a few weeks ago, and I wanted to make sure you got it. I sat in the truck in the parking lot of the post office for about 10 minutes thinking about it. I didn't go in. I drove home. I went to the shop. I made myself stay in the shop until the urge to send the second letter had passed. Because the second letter would have been about my anxiety, not about him. The first letter was for him. It said what I needed to say to the person I'd missed for 2 years. The second letter would have been to ease my own discomfort. And he didn't need to receive my discomfort. He was dealing with his own. I waited, and in the 6th week, he called. The 4th lesson is this. When you've done what you can do, you have to let it land where it lands. The letter is not a guarantee. The reaching is not a contract. You reach because reaching is the right thing to do regardless of whether the reaching is received. You reach because the alternative, staying in the stubbornness and the waiting and the "this is his move," costs more than the vulnerability of the letter costs. And then you wait, as long as it takes, and it's the one I want to be most careful about, because I don't want to make it sound simpler than it was, or more resolved than it is. David called on a Tuesday afternoon in October 2020, 3 years and 3 weeks after Helen died, the same month as her death, 3 years on. I've thought about that timing. I don't know if it was deliberate. I didn't ask. He said, "I got your letter." I said, "I know." And then there was a silence. Not the bad kind. The kind that happens when two people are standing at the same place and neither of them quite knows how to begin. I'd had 3 years to think about what I'd say if this moment came. And in the moment I had nothing, just the silence and the phone against my ear, and the sound of my own breathing. He said, "I don't know how to do this, Pop." I said, "I don't either. Can we start anyway?" He said, "Yeah." And we talked for 2 hours. Not about the 3 years, not mostly. About what had been happening in his life. About his work, which had changed significantly during those years. About his children, who had grown in ways I'd missed. About a trip he'd taken with Karen that summer. About a project he'd been working on at the house. We talked around the edges of the rupture for 2 hours. And that was right. The rupture didn't need to be explained in one call. The rupture needed to be survived. To have the two of us still on the same phone, at the end of 2 hours, still talking. That was enough for the first call. The fifth lesson is this. When a rupture heals, it doesn't heal by becoming as if it never happened. It heals by becoming something you've survived together. David and I are not where we were before the silence. We're somewhere else. A place we got to by surviving 3 years of not talking and then 2 hours on the phone, and then many more conversations since. A place that couldn't have been reached any other way. I don't know if I'd call it better than where we were before. I'd call it realer. We know things about the relationship now that we didn't know before the silence. About how fragile it was. About how much it matters to both of us. About the particular way we can hurt each other that we'd each been too proud to fully acknowledge. That knowing is valuable, even though the way it was acquired was painful. The sixth lesson was what I found to do with the grief that had no address. Because there was grief throughout those 3 years that I couldn't send anywhere. The grief of Helen's death, I could send that to Susan on the Thursday calls. I could send it to the shop, to the work, to the yellow legal pad. I could tell Helen about it in the way I still talk to her. But the grief of David's silence, I couldn't send that anywhere. I couldn't tell Susan without making her feel caught between us. I couldn't tell David because David was the one who wasn't there. I couldn't tell the neighbors or the men at the diner or anyone else without it becoming a story that wasn't mine alone to tell. So I held it. And holding it alone, in those 3 years, had a particular quality, a particular weight. What I found, slowly and not by design, was that the grief needed somewhere physical to go, not somewhere to be expressed, somewhere to be worked, the shop, not the making of things, the maintenance of things. In the first winter of the silence, I reshingled part of the roof, the north face, which had been needing attention for 2 years, and which I'd been putting off. I went up on that roof in November, not the best time to be on a roof in Maine, but I went, and I pulled the old shingles and laid the new ones, and I was up there for most of 3 days. It was too cold to be up there. The work was harder than it should have been, and I did it anyway, and at the end of 3 days, I had a roof that would hold through another decade of Maine winters. I don't think it was an accident that I chose that particular work in that particular winter. The roof had been needing attention. Something in me had been needing to do something that would hold. Something solid. Something I could put my body into and have come out right on the other side. The sixth lesson is this. Grief that has no address needs a physical place to go. Not therapy, not talking, not the intellectual processing of the thing. The body needs somewhere to put the weight. For some people it's walking, for some it's gardening. For me it was the roof, and the winter after that the garden fence, and the winter after that the shop floor that I'd been meaning to level since 1995. Whatever it is for you, find it. The body carries grief that the mind can't hold. Give the body somewhere to put it. The seventh lesson, and I want to take the most time with this one, because it's the one that took me the longest to find, and the one I believe mattered most, was learning to separate who I was from what he thought of me. For most of my adult life, my sense of myself was partly built on what the people I loved thought of me, what Helen thought of me, what my children thought of me, what the men I'd worked with thought of me. I knew this about myself, had known it for a long time, but I'd never had to reckon with it directly, because the people I loved had always, mostly, thought reasonably well of me. David's silence confronted me with a new situation. What does it mean to be a good father when your son won't speak to you? What does it mean to have lived a life worth living when one of the people you most wanted to live it well for has gone silent for 3 years? What does it mean to know who you are when the person who knows you best, or who should know you best, seems to have decided that what he knows isn't worth maintaining contact with? I was 75 years old, and I didn't know the answer. What I had to find, and this took all 3 years, it didn't come quickly, was a version of self-knowledge that didn't require David's validation to be real. A way of knowing who I was that could stand up even in the silence, even in the absence of the one person I most wanted to say, "I see you, Pop. I know who you are. You're all right." I found it mostly in the work, in the things my hands had made that were still standing, in the houses, the ones I'd built for other people that I'd sometimes drive past and see lit up at night, someone's family inside them, the children I'd never meet growing up in the rooms I'd framed. In this house, the one I'd built with my own hands in 1971, that had held everything my life contained for 50 years. I knew who I was because the work told me. The work doesn't lie. A joint either holds or it doesn't. A house either stands or it doesn't. Mine had stood. I also found it in Helen, not in her absence, in her presence, in the 54 years of her knowing me better than anyone ever had. She had known me fully, the good and the less good, the capable and the insufficient, and she had chosen to stay. Every year she had chosen again. That choosing is a form of testimony. Her staying was her saying, "I know who you are, and that person is worth staying for." I held on to that testimony during the 3 years, when the inventory ran in the night and everything looked like failure. I'd bring up her face, the way she'd put her hand on my arm, the particular quality of her attention when she looked at me across the table, the green cup she'd bring without asking because after 30 years, she didn't need to ask. That's who I was too. I was the man Helen brought the green cup to. I was the man who had been worth staying for 54 years. That man existed independently of what David was or wasn't saying about him. The seventh lesson is the one I want to leave with, because I think it's the one with the most use in it. It's this: you cannot borrow your identity from someone else's silence. Who you are cannot live or die based on whether the person you love is speaking to you or not. You have to find it somewhere that is yours alone. In the work, in the memory of the people who loved you when they didn't have to, in the mornings you got up anyway, in the things you built that are still standing. I want to say something more specific about this, about the process of finding it, because naming it as a lesson makes it sound more deliberate than it actually was. The truth is, I didn't decide to find my identity in something other than David's silence. I arrived at it gradually, through a long series of mornings, in the shop, with the tools in my hands and the work in front of me, and the silence from Portland continuing. I arrived at it not by reasoning but by surviving. The surviving itself was the finding. Each morning I got up and made the coffee. Was a morning I'd gotten up. Each morning in the shop was a morning I was still the carpenter. Each cut that came out right, each joint that held, each piece of wood that became something because I'd put my hands on it. Each of those was a small piece of evidence that I existed independently of whether David was speaking to me. The evidence accumulated, not into certainty. I don't think you ever arrive at certainty about your own worth, but into something, into a kind of provisional knowing, the kind that says, even if David never calls back, even if the silence goes on for 10 years or for the rest of my life, even then, I am still the man who built this house. I am still the man Helen loved for 54 years. I am still the man who tends the lupines in June because she asked me to. I am still here, still doing, still making things that will last. That man is not defined by David's call or David's silence. That man predates the call and will persist regardless of what the call says or doesn't say. I want to say something specific to the parent who is reading this, and whose child has been silent for a year, or 2 years, or 5. Something I wish someone had said to me in the first year. The silence is the most powerful thing. It takes your history with that child, and it turns it into a question. All the years of loving them, all the showing up and the providing and the trying. The silence makes all of that feel like it might not have been what you thought it was. Like maybe you were a worse parent than you believed. Like maybe the love wasn't enough. Like maybe none of it counted. That feeling is real, but it's not the truth. What you gave them is in them. It doesn't go away because they go silent. The things you built into them, the values, the capacity to love, the particular way they see the world that has some of you in it even when they'd rather it didn't, those are in them. They can't unreceive what you gave them. And who you are is not contingent on their speaking, not on their speaking to you, not on their forgiving you, not on their calling in October 3 years in. You are who you've been through all the years. The silence doesn't revise the years. Hold that. Hold it especially on the bad nights, when the inventory runs and everything looks like failure. The years were the years. The love was the love. The silence is just the silence. It will say what it says, and it will end when it ends. And it does not have the authority to define you that you're tempted to give it. And when David called in October 2020, and I heard his voice on the line, I want to be honest about this. I was glad, more glad than I can describe. The gladness was enormous. But I was also, for the first time in my life, something I hadn't been before. I was a man who had survived not being found, who had discovered that he could be himself even in the absence of the person whose absence had threatened to undo him. That is not a small thing to know about yourself. The fire's very low. The morning is almost completely gone. I don't know your situation. I don't know which child has gone silent, or what happened between you, or how long it's been, or whether the call has come yet. I don't know if you're waiting, or if you've stopped waiting, or if you found a way to live inside the uncertainty. What I know is that the silence doesn't have to mean what you think it means, that the grief of it needs somewhere to go. The body needs the roof, or the fence, or the garden, or whatever is yours. That holding two true things at once is harder than choosing one, but truer than choosing one. That someone has to go first, and it might as well be you. That who you are cannot be held hostage to whether they call back. And that sometimes they do call back. October, 3 years and 3 weeks after his mother died, the same month. I picked up on the first ring, and here's what I want to say about where we are now. Because the story doesn't end with the call. The story continues. David and I are not where we were before the silence. I said that earlier, and I want to stay with it. We're somewhere else, not worse. Not better in the simple sense, different. The place we're in now required the 3 years to reach. It has the weight of the 3 years in it. When David and I talk now, on Sundays the way we've talked for years, there's something in the conversations that wasn't there before. A directness, a willingness to say the actual thing, a quality of having been through something together that neither of us would choose to go through again, and that neither of us would give back. That's the strange arithmetic of hard things. You wouldn't choose them, and they give you something you couldn't have gotten any other way. I'm 82 now. David is 58. We have whatever years we have left, and we're spending them differently than we spent the years before the silence. That's enough. That's more than enough. I don't know what your situation is. I don't know how long the silence has been, or what it's cost you, or whether the letter has been sent. But I know this. You are still the parent who loves that child. The silence doesn't revoke the love, And the love doesn't require their speaking to be real. You are still that person. Hold that. If anything I said today reached you, you can subscribe to walk with me a while longer. I read every comment. Tell me your story if you want to. Tell me where you are in it. I'll listen. Take care of yourself. Write the letter. Hold who you are. The fire's still going. I'll see you next time.